Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani on a live. I think I actually needed recovery time from all the other lives and sort of still a little like, woo, but here we are again and some great stuff to talk about that is coming up. And so where I want to do those, I want to start this live somewhere on a topic. And then I'm going to talk about some interesting, really, actually, I'm exciting offerings we have coming up in the next 6 months. And then I'm going to take a couple questions at the end. So if you have any, cue them up. So let's start at the top. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've been in this live space with you. And in this period of time, since I've done a live, I have traveled kind of all over the world, talking about the book, talking about narcissistic relationships. And of course, every day I study, I read, I do the stuff like that. It's just sort of a daily thing for me, for better, for worse. And I have to say, having talked to so many people and even talked to people who don't really think this is a thing, right? Some journalists push me and they say, well, is this really a thing? I talk to therapists who question, is this really a thing? Are you overreaching? It's a couple of thoughts that come up. One thing I've noticed, and it would be interesting if in the sort of the chat feature, whatever it's called here, you talk amongst yourselves too on what your experience has been. There's such a focus, and this just comes so clear to me. And I think it's a big reason we're not fully understanding narcissistic abuse. There's such a focus on trying to understand and even trying to, I don't want to say blame, but maybe, and not even diagnose, but like pathologize or cast a questionable eye on a person who is struggling in a relationship like this. Basically, the question is, what's wrong with you? Why are you having such a hard time in this relationship, right? And for time immemorial, it's why I really got into this work. It's always been person's in a narcissistic relationship and the therapist and everyone else, is this anxiety? Is this depression? Is this, is this that? Now, those things may be happening, right? But the problem is it's never been sort of linked to the source, right? And in the more severe cases, the reactions really look post-traumatic in any of you. I think even in relatively moderate cases, people are in these relationships, you start seeing fawn responses becoming standard. You see a lot of hypervigilance. You see a lot of trying to be perfect. You see a lot more sort of obsessive and compulsive patterns, trying to keep everything in control for fear of the reaction of the narcissist, right? So then we look at the person who's in the relationship as some sort of fragile person who is having trouble coping with this relationship. And that's when I lost my mind. And that's when I got into this work. So I'm like, I don't think they're having trouble coping. I actually don't think this is a situation a person can cope with unless they're really given a map. And that map is, this is what narcissism is. This is how it shows up. There's nothing you can do. It is not your fault. This behavior is unacceptable. And if you're going to stay, try this. If you're going to go, expect this. But this is not a you thing. The only you thing part of this is that you're in the relationship, right? But then the other side of this conversation is that the people who are engaging in this abuse, and you can call them narcissistic, you can call them antagonistic, you can call them jerks, you can call them a-holes, you can call them toxic, you can call them psychopaths, sociopaths. You know the languaging, right? You know it better than a lot of people in this business. We've gotten so, are they narcissistic? Are they not? I'm like, does it matter? Let's look at this laundry list of stuff they're doing to you, right? We're more likely to excuse their behavior. Well, maybe it's their trauma. Well, maybe like they're not being talked to the way they want. Well, so we're so curious about their why, what it's about. We're never curious about the survivor's why, by the way. We don't do a deep dive into that. But my goodness, with the people who do the bad thing, we are so focused on trying to figure it out rather than the rather simple approach. This behavior is unacceptable. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not using evil. I'm not using those terms. Their behavior is unacceptable. It's not, it's just not. And you can spend, I've written entire books on this, right? They're behind me on all the stuff that leads to narcissistic or toxic or antagonistic, whatever word you want to use, person to behave the way they do. And you know what? That's not worth a hill of beans when someone's screaming at you. Understanding where that came from, when your sympathetic nervous system is lighting up, fight, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you can't catch your breath. You don't know what to say. But an hour later, you're like, God, I wish I said that. Right. And you're still trying to remain attached and all of that. We don't talk about that. Instead, we view the person in the relationship as having some form of problem because they can't cope with someone treating them badly. Why should anyone be able to cope with that? Really? Like, why should a person be able to cope with being harmed in a relationship on a regular basis by a person that so many people in the world think, oh, he's so good in the job, or gosh, what a cool person? You have to endure that too. In other situations, like, for example, people who are in relationships with people who are pretty severe addicts, everyone knows they're an addict. So there might be some sympathy, like, oh, sorry about that. Yeah, you're still going to get the people who give you the side eye and call you codependent, but there's at least a context. With this whole narcissism thing, there's not even that. And I know I'm kind of getting a little worked up, but I can't tell you this multiple times a day pushback I get on this, and the multiple times. And I start sounding like, oh, Dr. Ramani gets a little bit heavy and intense. So now everyone's calling me, not everyone. Some people call me kind of, she's too intense. She's too out of her mind. She's crazy, right? I see it for the gaslight it is, but I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated on behalf of all survivors out there because I'm just going out and having intellectual arguments about this. And it actually curdles my blood to think about what it must be like for every survivor out there who's had to encounter the entire queue of enabling family members and therapists who don't get it, and physicians who doubt you, and workplaces who doubt you, and friends who doubt you. So that's where I'm going to start. And what I always call it is sort of dismantling that two to tango paradigm. I refuse to believe that if somebody is trying to maintain a relationship, I don't know, for the sake of their children, or because of their because of their afraid of post-separation abuse, or because of religious or cultural or practical reasons, I refuse to believe that there is something weak or wrong or silly about that. I think we need to give folks a roadmap for all of that, right? So the two to tango is that a person staying in a relationship does not tee them up to be abused. A person staying in a relationship does not make them responsible for what's going on. And frankly, a person leaving a relationship does not tee them up for having to endure all those, what I've had many therapists say, well, people have hurt feelings and abandonment issues when they're left. You don't get to stalk people. Like, that's not on the list of okay things to do. The rest of us lied in bed, cried it out, gained some weight, went to therapy, and figured it out. Okay. That other behavior is not okay. And I think one of the big problems in the field of psychology is we're so focused on the internal interior experience that we don't take a page out of what the social work field does, sociology does, everything that's going on around the person. I'm going to be frank with you, with most people I've talked about, on these hundreds of people I've talked to in the last 6 weeks, and the thousands of others I've talked to, and people I've worked with clinically. I know for a fact, because I've seen it happen, that if some magical reason, sometimes it's because a narcissistic person dies, who knows why, but the narcissistic person cheats and disappears, whatever. But if for some reason the narcissistic toxic person or people were lifted out of that person's life, the person leaves the job, gets fired from the job, while there might be an initial sting, we see an almost immediate improvement. They're no longer living in a circumstance where they're being screamed at all the time. Is there a subset of folks who don't improve even once that changes? Yes. And that's where we start getting into the deeper clinical issues, potentially of PTSD, CPTSD, and other major mental health issues that do require more, stringent kind of intervention. But for a lot of folks, it's the intervention we can't do, even though we know it would work, is lift the toxic people out of a person's life. And I'm going to say almost overnight, but pretty damn close, things are going to turn around. And it would be interesting, again, in the chat, if you talk amongst yourselves, if you ever had that experience of a narcissistic person rather quickly getting moved out of your life. And it may not be that you're like at the top of your game instantly, but you'd be like, I moved through the world in a very, very different way. So you can see I'm a little bit like, my whole sort of spicy, hot temperament is getting a little bit worked up here because I think I'm frustrated. So it's good I'm doing the live, right? I've even heard people say, well, they're not narcissistic. They only get narcissistic when they're mad. I'm working on a video on that today. So we're going to be talking about that. to say someone's only toxic, only dysregulated, only mean, only manipulative when they're mad, that's a problem. That's not like, well, so isn't that okay? No, that's the definition of narcissism, is that when they get ego injured, when they get their little fragile temperaments get set off, any of that sensitivity stuff happens for them, they go off because they're quote unquote angry. And someone was trying to explain to me recently, well, that makes it okay because at other times they're nice. And I literally almost went exorcist head spin on them. I'm like, no, 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 no. That's exactly what makes it not okay. Because now this person lives in chronic fear because this narcissistic person seems to get angry because the wind shifted to be from the south, or the salt shaker was in the wrong place, or they weren't complimented on bringing in the trash where everyone, or bringing out the trash, even though everyone else in the household does that all the time without a compliment, and they feel underappreciated. They're only narcissistic. They're only bad when they're angry. So it's been a week, let's put it that way. So one of the other issues that comes up, though, is how tricky this is given sort of the continuum of all of this, right? One thing that also has come very clear, and something that's really going to be the focus of my work, especially towards the end of summer into the fall, is that I'm seeing how different the experiences are at the mild, moderate, and severe ends, particularly that severe end. And at that severe end of narcissistic abuse, and this is where we start seeing the dark tetrad stuff, the psychopathy stuff, the sociopathy stuff, the really, really severe stuff showing up. What is happening for folks there? It is very much complex trauma. And so there's a lot of, you sort of feel like you're so overwhelmed. Your nervous system's overwhelmed. Your body is overwhelmed. You feel sick. You're so hypervigilant. It's difficult to sleep. It's difficult to manage emotions. Either you're dissociated from those emotions, or you're expressing them in ways that you're like, ooh, that was probably not the best way for me to express that, or they're dysregulated and other people in the environment are bothered, whatever it may be. That's sort of addressing that from a trauma-informed perspective. It's almost like that has to be the first stop on the train. But for folks who are at the moderate and even the high mild end of this, a lot of the stuff around the education, around getting it what it is. And that's actually where YouTube has often come in really, strong here, is that for folks who really like, I didn't know this was a thing. And now that I know it's a thing, because folks in that moderate to high mild end don't tend to have that same kind of overwhelmed nervous system feel, they're able to sort of say, don't get me wrong, it's not to say that you don't get triggered, you don't get upset, your body's not holding it, you don't feel sick. All those things are happening, but it's not the only story for you. You're still probably getting up, doing things you need. In fact, in that moderate end and even that high mild end, what we see, and then certainly in the mild end, we see people who are getting up, going to work, having friendships, saying, actually, my life runs really well, except for the narcissistic people in it. And if they weren't there, it would actually be running quite well. And that there are times, certainly you ruminate. Certainly if the narcissist is having a bad day, it can really throw things asunder. There's a sort of a low-grade anxiety, but it's definitely not that overwhelm. And I think one thing that's showing us is that because this makes this a hard topic to talk about, because somebody who's watching this and is going through significant domestic violence with someone who's engaging in coercive control and is isolated and scared, and there's been violence and you don't know what's going to set them off, and you're really confused, and you're really heavily in that trauma bonded space, and your nervous system doesn't even get a chance to play catch up, right? That you're not even able to get to that taking in all this stuff I'm teaching you. That's a very different group than a group who's in that moderate side. You're all going through something similar. But because bodies, minds, emotions respond differently, it's really now, even from the way I work with therapists, is helping them see that there's a range here and there's different ways we need to approach folks to work with them. And then people who are going through much more severe narcissistic relationships that are more unsettling, that are much more traumatizing, the kind of care you need is much more long-term, consistent, protracted. Folks in that moderate to high mild end often do well with, like, therapy always becomes very useful, but a lot of education, and then again figuring out those workarounds, and the best outcomes are often for those who can get some distance from the relationship. So there's so much to always learn, there's so much to understand. This is a very new area, but it's an area that's still getting a lot of pushback in its fashion. And I think people are getting so lost in, are they narcissistic or are they not? Are they psychopathic or are they not? All but I've always said, look at the list of behaviors. And if the list of behaviors is unacceptable, you can call them a squirrel or an apple tree for all I care. Because at the end of the day, these behaviors are slowly making you sick. And the other thing I often say is, before we transition to some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, What happens then in these relationships, especially because you're told that this is why are you having, sorry, I got something in my eye. Why are you having so much trouble coping? Why aren't you able to handle this? Let's figure out new ways to communicate, two to tango, two to tango, two to tango. The one thing that survivors find, sadly, to be useful, and I put useful in quotes because it's not really useful. It is actually an unfortunate coping and trauma response, is to stop feeling. Because if you feel in these relationships, you feel sad, you feel grief, you feel anger, you feel worried. If you feel, and the narcissistic person is behaving in these injustice inducing ways all the time, the feeling's wiping you out. And on top of that, there's nowhere for the feeling to go. Unless you've got friends who are willing to listen to you talk about it a lot, or you got a therapist on speed dial who you talk to multiple times a week. The sheer amount of frustration and grief and negative emotions that people in these relationships feel, and keep in mind, the one place you can never take those emotions, ding, 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 is the narcissistic relationship or family or whatever, right? If you bring them up, you're crazy, you're needy, you're selfish, something's wrong with you. So that's why I say the majority of survivors of these relationships become something I call overregulated. You're so either hold back on emotions or don't even feel them, that people around you, A, might think you're doing well because you're not expressing emotions. B, you're probably getting sick all the time because these emotions aren't getting expressed. But you also, slowly but surely, there's a numbing and in some cases even a mild dissociation. You're fully distanced from your emotions and you'll even feel it like it literally is a numbing. Now, in the short term, that numbing's working for you, right? Because now you're not feeling these feels. And that in some ways, the not feeling the feels allows the narcissistic relationship to persist, because that's the first thing they're often going to come for, your feelings as well as your wants and needs and the things, your humanness, right? So if you're not feeling and you're almost robotically going through it, it will work most days. But then narcissistic people expect us all to be their performing marionettes and show them emotion when they want us to show them emotion. Because if they want you to be emotional on a day they want you to be emotional and you're not, then you're cold, right? It's sort of that's what I'm saying. It's this game of whack-a-mole, and that you need to be a mind reader. But something that happens for survivors is there's a day, maybe you're going through therapy, maybe you've done the trauma-informed work, maybe you're just understanding it more. Maybe you find your places and your people and you have social support where you're like, oh, I can actually safely express emotion here. Yeah. That now what's starting to happen is that you're starting to feel. And that's terrifying for a survivor because emotion is dangerous in these relationships, right? And that's why I sort of out of my mind one day, like sometimes clever things come out of my head, but it's not as often as I'd like. I said to group, healing is feeling. I thought, healing is feeling. Because now, if you're feeling and it is not overwhelming you and you have places to take it and you're giving yourself permission, it means that you're not going into those standard sympathetic, like kind of, completely kind of either giving into the relationship or not able to fully be in your body while you're in the relationship, but actually able to feel and say, I'm pissed. Like, this is messed up. And I get that I'm stuck in it, but their behavior is not acceptable. You may not be saying that to them, but that anger, great emotion, the sadness, the sense of, I'm actually really clever and I'm frittering my life away in this job with a narcissist. I'm sad, and you feel a sense of sadness overtake you, right? And you're with it and you're willing to identify it. That's healthy too. Healing is feeling. So let's talk about another way to feel. And I'm hoping that's sort of setting the tone for my little bit of a tantrum today. I have long not done live events for a variety of reasons, maybe because I'm an introvert, because of the pandemic. Logistically, they're always a little bit more challenging. But we are getting to a point where no matter how much we do virtually, and I'm seeing this as I do more live events, there's no substitute for being in the room. And there's two opportunities coming up that I'm actually really looking forward to. One of them is for therapists, coaches, anyone who works with people going through narcissistic relationships. Okay, so this is for anyone who's a therapist, counselor, social worker, psychologist, registered psychiatric nurse practitioner of any kind, and coaches who work with clients who are experiencing narcissistic relationships. This program is happening in London. People are like, why the hell are you doing it in London? Couple of reasons. Number one, there's a whole cadre of therapists in the United Kingdom and in Europe who are seeing these clients and don't even have as much access as people do to programs in the States, number one. And then there was a connection I'd had there, and we sort of built it out there. We thought, let's try it and we'll see how it works. Now, the beauty of this is many of you who are therapists know I already have a 36-hour online asynchronous do it at your own pace program that's pretty comprehensive. And it includes not only a lot of stuff on working with clients experiencing this, but also on legal ethical issues, as well as, trauma informed, being more trauma informed and working with these clients. That's all asynchronous, meaning you watch it. But here's what can't happen there, because it's just not possible, is us sitting in the room and talking about the cases, hashing it out, breaking into groups and really talking about cases with me and other experts in the field, particularly law and law and ethics experts in this field, really talking it out. How do we work with the clients? How do we feel as therapists? So mixing in the opportunity for therapists and bringing in anonymized cases to talk them out. What do I do in a case like this, doc? And getting that feedback, not only just from me and other experts I know, but other people who are working with these clients. What we're all together figuring out what works best, and talking about some of these exact issues I'm discussing today when we're working with clients who are going through more severe coercive control, and where there's physical violence and there's more dangerousness issues, and the differences in that and people who are going through maybe more moderate, the day-to-day death by 1,000 cuts kind of stuff. So that's September 5th through 7th. We'll be in London. Those of you looking for a little vacation after the summer crowds die out, it could be a way to build in the two. I'm very excited about this, because it's going to go away from the talk about how to do the work. And they're really, really it's going to be a conversation. It's not going to be me standing in the front of the room talking to you. It's going to be people voicing in. That's one. The second is for anyone. You could be a therapist, you could be a human being, you could be anything from anything. Doesn't matter. This is for survivors. And it is a live retreat to come together for survivors and anyone healing from narcissistic relationships to really work on the healing in person through a series of exercises, group connection, recognizing you're not alone. That's going to be happening in Boone, North Carolina, in a very, very beautiful, beautiful place in nature, where there not only will be meditation training sessions and breathing workshops to give you skills that you can take beyond, then there'll be that opportunity to connect with other survivors, engage in some really meaningful exercises that will help you sort of with your healing. And again, in a beautiful place. And so that will be November 1 to 3. And that date was very intentionally chosen because it's actually Diwali on the Hindu calendar, which to me, what the secular meaning of that is. Diwali is sort of where good triumphs over evil. It's about light, but it's really about this inner light. So I thought, that's it, because this to me is what that is about. It is, and I don't want to make a narcissistic relationship, your healing being about good versus evil, but it's really about your goodness finally getting a chance to shine. So that's November 1 to 3. Now, keep in mind, these are both limited in terms of the number of people who can go, because the venues will only hold so much. Any links, information, details, all of that, they're in the YouTube video description I made about this, and in my Instagram bio. You can find everything there. And if you have questions, there are ways to reach us that are there too. So it's a whole different experience meeting people live. Now, not all of you are going to be able to jump on a plane or jump in your car or go other places. I know that, money is limited. I know time is limited. Logistics are limited. So the virtual healing program keeps going on. And in the next 48 hours, I just want to let you know, you'll get 50% off your first month in this program. And this month is actually a really cool topic. Some months we lay the topics out long ahead, and then we move them around depending on what folks in the community are saying, like, hey, we'd like a month on this, and try to make it very responsive. And we've already done quite a few. And the beauty of the program is once you come in, you have access to that as this huge library. But this month is about your personality. And I think one of the other issues that comes up in narcissistic relationships is we get so caught up in understanding the narcissism and the manipulation and the gaslighting and the tactics and all that stuff, right? We get so caught up in that piece of it that we forget that each of us has a whole personality and a self, right? Healing is that self gets to be in the world. And personalities are complicated. They really, really are, because I don't think that there's any quote unquote perfect personality. All of us have our quirks, right? And so understanding our personality can also give us some insight and inform our healing. And more than anything, and something I've heard many survivors say repeatedly, is how your personality in some ways got a little bit shifted. I wouldn't say changed, but shifted by the relationship. So you might have been a very gregarious, warm, exuberant person, and the volume on that may have gotten turned down a bit because the narcissistic person would make fun of you, or they've isolated you, or socializing with anyone is a problem for them. So you feel like, I'm not as gregarious and warm and fun as it's still there. It's still there. And but it's not expressing itself in the same way. Some of you might have said, I became ultra, almost compulsively conscientious, not because that's my nature, but if I didn't keep things a certain way, the narcissistic person would rage at me, and on and on and on. So this is sort of a cool month because we have sort of two personality assessments we're asking people to do. It's option. Nothing ever is required, but these two personality assessments, I got to tell you, it was an eye opener for me to take them, because I've taken them through the years in my teaching and consulting and even my research, and mine shifted a bit, and it really gave me pause to even reflect, even for myself personally, how it's shifted, and for each of you to know that there's a personality there in you, and there might be parts of it like, ooh, that's an interesting piece to learn about myself and put a name to, or this something I suspect I know about myself. The more we know about ourselves, this is what I'm saying, there's no one size fits all. There's no one like, do these 10 steps and you're going to heal from narcissistic relationships. There has to be a tailoring to the individual. And part of that tailoring is knowing your personality. So that is what June is about. It seems like a good Northern Hemisphere kick off the summer kind of a program. So we have a workshop coming up on June 22nd, the day after the first day of summer. And then we have our guided meditation coming up towards the end of the month, and our Q&A session coming up at the end of the month. And we usually tend to stay a little focused on the topic with the questions, but we mix it up. I'm really hoping that this is an eye-opening month. Sometimes people do something like this and say, damn, I am more extroverted than I thought, but I convinced myself I'm an introvert because da 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 da, right? And so because it was easier. In many ways, being introverted is a little bit easier in these relationships because they're so quick. Narcissistic folks are so quick to cut you off from support, they make fun of how you socialize. And in fact, a big theme that comes up for a lot of survivors is social anxiety, and that sense of so heavily socially monitoring yourselves, because the narcissistic person will often say, God, you sound so ridiculous when you talk to other people. I've got to tell you, this is one of these experiences that almost everybody in these relationships has heard, which is basically the narcissistic person projecting their social insecurity onto the other person, and basically intimating that you're socially unskilled, you're weird, you say weird things. Not true. So you start sort of censoring and over monitoring yourself, which makes the social anxiety worse. And some people will find over time that led them to kind of cut back on their social world a bit and wonder, well, maybe I'm actually introverted, when rather you were sort of given this distorted sense of how you show up socially. And as in anything in the narcissistic relationship, in order for this relationship to work, strangely, we have to buy into their version of us. It is like a cult, right? If you're in a cult and you're constantly in variance with the cult leader's teachings, they're either going to abuse you, they're going to not let you sleep, like you're going to do all the culty things so they can get through to you, or you're going to get out, right? And so we offer a lot in this healing program. The healing program is something I'm very, very proud of. It's a ton of work, I have to say, and that to me reminds me that I think it's really something very special. And I'll tell you what makes it special, not my work, but the people who are in it and my team who runs it. I really, want to tip my hat to a couple of the people who run it. I was talking to one of my team members about a month or two ago, and she knew by name some of the people. This is thousands of people. Like, that's how carefully it's moderated, that we are aware of what's happening, how we are. So you've got not only this really wonderful online community of people who are going through narcissistic relationships, you don't feel alone, but you also get honestly, the workshops are very much based on science, on theory. Like, I'm not pulling this stuff out of my rear end. There's work going in every month to make sure that you're getting the best information on this. The guided meditation is something that you can keep it and have it at any other time. Like, it might just be something that you keep them as a library of them. The question and answer session odds are someone's asking a question you're asking, even if you didn't get around to ask it. And the link to join the healing program, you want to do it now and get that 50% off. It's a great way to see if it works. It's a month-to-month program. You signing up isn't committing you to some long period of time. If you don't like it after a month, you're like, yeah, I tried it. It wasn't for me. That's fine. You might try it for a few months and say it made a difference. We've had people join and be in it for the long term. We've had people join for a year and say, this really helped me turn a corner, but I think I'm good now. Again, at the end of the day, all I want is for all of you to heal and soar on your own wings. And if you don't need this, trust me, there's plenty of other people out there in the world who ultimately will. So, it's for you to have as one more tool that you use to help you heal and get back to your whole self. So again, the link to join is in the YouTube video description and in my Instagram bio. So you can find all the details you need there. So for our remaining time, I'd love to see if anyone has any questions that I could potentially answer. So let me start here. What are some responses that I can use when my narcissistic ex corners me on daily calls and text messages? This is all related to co-parenting dynamic. Also, our child has Down syndrome and is living with autism, so we have to communicate regularly. So this is a great question. And again, all of co-parenting is going to be difficult. But when there is a child with any form of special needs where there has to be a lot more coordination, there's more coordination with specialists and the way you might work through institutional systems like school, and nutritional needs and other care needs are just going to be, you have to be on it in a very different way. So I think that one thing that is number one, especially in writing, okay, the daily calls are harder. It's always going to be harder to get off a call, but sort of keeping it slim and trim. I would ask this person, if you haven't already, are you using an app, a communication app like My Talking Talking Parents or My Family Wizard? The reason I say that is because it's a given that whole text sequence then becomes part of a court record. So people know that they're consenting to that, and it creates something that is a very, it's something that can be kept, and that sometimes helps curtail some of that. Since I'm not entirely sure what you mean by corners me, my guess is they won't let go, and they're using the communication about your child as a way to get in with you. What gets hard here is that people say, I want to end this call without them losing it. I want to end this text sequence without them getting mad. That option may not necessarily be on the table. So it may be you saying to yourself, like, how many go back and forth? Like, because once the question is answered, what time the child is going to get picked up, what time the OT is coming over, what time a therapy appointment is, what time the school pickup is, did the lunch get into the bag? That question gets answered. You're sort of done. So with the texting, once the question's answered and you can say, okay, we've got that figured out. Thanks. That becomes an end to you. You don't need to keep engaging. Will they get mad? Probably, yeah. In terms of the calls, you want to get to the question as quickly as possible, because they're going to yammer on and say, I just want to make sure that I know you said blah, blah, blah about school. Can we just get that cleared out? I just want to make sure I'm clear. So now the question is answered, and then you can give yourself the option of saying, how long do I want to keep this going? 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and literally set yourself a timer, and set a timer that makes a noise. So then there's a noise in the background and you're like, I got to jump. There's something going on. And you might want to mix up your timers, because Apple lets you use, like, there's 100 of them. So mix up the sound of the timer and use that as an opportunity to jump off. Okay. So I understand the need to communicate regularly, but I think you want to cut to the chase on the question as quickly as you can, ideally in text so it's documented, get it answered, and then get yourself out of there. They're going to get mad. Yes, they are. And they're probably going to do it every day. And then figure out what doesn't need to be done every day. And then also experiment with how long it takes you before you respond again. Respond to them. Like, sometimes the narcissistic people program us to feel like we got to get in touch with them. We have to respond right away. Unless it's truly emergent, you can give yourself a minute and maybe sort of train them a little bit that it doesn't have to be an instant response. But also document all of it. And if you can switch them over to a parenting communication app, that would be better, because they may not say as many sort of bizarre things on that kind of in that kind of space, knowing it could end up potentially discoverable if there's any other ongoing sort of forays into family court about your child. So those would be some of my suggestions there, but none of this is none of this is easy. And I would also recommend to you, if you ever feel up to it, it's probably more than you want to take on. I know you're not alone in this, in co-parenting with a narcissistic person, and you have a special needs child. I can think of several people off the top of my head. I sincerely hope, and maybe you'd be the catalyst to this, that you would maybe try to one day start an online community. Maybe there's even other people in this chat, and slowly come together, because I do think that there's some very unique demands you face, because there's no getting loose on communication. The consistency is necessary. Your child needs that consistency. And sometimes there's more players, like I said, with OT and things like that. So just you consider potentially working with others to set up that community, because I think also amongst yourselves, given the higher need for communication in these co-parenting relationships, you may find some really important information from each other. Any other questions? If you're told it's not about their actions, but all about your reactions, how do you deal with that if that's the case? So I don't know who's telling you it's your reactions, okay? If it's them, if it's a third party. Always approach things with curiosity, okay? It's very easy to say, nope, it's always the narcissistic person. I'll tell folks, okay, take a step back. Be curious. How are you showing up? How are you reacting, okay? And you can even say, was this a healthy way I respond? Do I respond like this in other relationships that are healthier relationships? Okay. How do I feel after this response? All right. Then work backwards. Look at what the catalysts are to your reactions, right? Because it can't be all about your reaction, right? It can't only be your reaction. Something is happening. And then I want you, for yourself, so you're 100% clean, to sort of understand what the backing and forthing is. We had, I think it was actually last month in in the healing program. I think it was last month. That the whole month was, what if I think I'm the bad one? What if I'm doing bad things in this relationship? I'm going to put myself up there on the block, and many of you would also look back and say, I've said things and done things in this relationship I am not proud of. I was not my best self, and we'll say, in fact, I've not done that in other relationships. And when we do these so-called not ideal things in these relationships, we then feel like we're complicit in the dynamic. We're just as bad as them. That's why I often have people do sort of an analysis of, how did you get there? Okay. And are there certain patterns that are kind of ending up in the same place? So you can also start pruning that if that's the case. But in the vast majority of cases, that your reactions are actually normative reactions. In fact, was one I heard the other day. What was it? It was so important. This was one that I'd heard. It was a gaslighting thing, where it was people who were married, and the narcissistic, and so one person was desperately trying to get the partner to understand the narcissistic partner to understand their point of view. Like, can you see where I'm coming from? Can you? And I mean, they were doing the opposite of not going deep, right? And ultimately, what the narcissistic person said to them, and you're going to love this: if I were to really get how you were feeling and behave in that way, as though I got what you were feeling, then that would make me a liar. I'd have to lie to believe that your behavior is normal, right? So basically, I'd be a liar. I'd have to show up as a lying person, because that would mean I was okay with your behavior, and your behavior is a mess. So no matter what, this person, what your experience is not valid, is what that person was saying. And so I think that it is, they're doing something. My guess is your reaction to that is because the thing they're doing is harmful or abusive. And so, just like in many narcissistic relationships, the rule of the land is respond the way I want, or don't respond at all. And that's not a relationship. So how do you deal with that if that's the case? Number one, sketch it out for yourself and figure out what this is. Number two, my sense is, don't go deep, because they're already painting you in the corner. They are gaslighting you, most likely. And so you defending or engaging or explaining or any of that is probably going to get you nowhere fast. You've been given a big piece of data, though. And now you know that you now understand the limits of this relationship, right? Because that's really what this is. It's the recognition of the limits of the relationship. And so the key piece here, and I've worked with a lot of folks who've even remained in narcissistic marriages for long periods of time, in narcissistic families for long periods of time. And they're very aware they're being gaslighted. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm very aware that they're gaslighting me. It doesn't feel good. But they're like, I don't feel like I've gone crazy. They're like, I'm very clear on what reality is. But they're sad that they're never going to be able to illuminate reality to this other person, but they're aware that they can't. So I think if you could hold to that line, which is reality, okay? And the other thing I would suggest, if you have other people in your purview, friends, therapists, anyone, this is done with me all the time as a therapist, the client will really lay it out. And this is, again, the beauty of electronic communication. I'm seeing a text message sequence. So it's not like they're lying to me. They're showing me the back and forth between them and someone else. And you can read rage in a text. And in any of these cases, they're saying, was my reaction, like, was that an appropriate reaction? Most cases, the client thinks they're responding incorrectly. And I'm actually surprised that they didn't go absolutely ballistic on this person. I mean, I would praise them on their level of regulation. So if you could find other people around you who can sort of give you some feedback on your behavior, that can sometimes also be really eye-opening. But I hope altogether those things are helpful. But like I said, we all need to be honest with ourselves for a minute and say, okay, I'm taking ownership of my part of it. And then sometimes people say, but they're saying that I close off during an argument. Okay. That's a pushback a lot of people get in narcissistic relationships. I become distant. I pull out. To which I'd say to someone, if that's what's happening, let's look into the history of that. Where did you learn to become a human turtle in this relationship and pull in your legs and your arms? Where did that lesson get learned? Oftentimes it was a traumatic family of origin or a narcissistic family of origin. Sometimes it was just what they learned over the course of the relationship, that the best way to avoid getting raged at was to not get in the mud. And for a lot of people, because it's happening so often, it becomes a sympathetic nervous system response of either flighting or freezing. And so those kinds of responses may be happening too. So the narcissist is telling a story around it of you're withdrawing, you're abandoning, you're withholding. But in fact, your reaction is actually one of, I'm overwhelmed because every time I try to say something. However, the pro-narcissism brigade will say, well, the narcissistic person's response is a trauma response. It's their fight response. I don't buy it because they don't do that with everyone. And odds are, for most survivors of narcissistic relationships, when they sense that maybe they've disappointed someone or angered someone in other relationships, most survivors of these relationships, even if it's happening someplace else, like work or with a friend or something, even though that other person's not narcissistic, you have similar reactions in those situations. There's a uniformity on how you might withdraw because you've been trained on it in the narcissistic relationship. The narcissistic person, on the other hand, does not rage at the CEO. They manage to keep it together there. So don't tell me that there's their automatic response. It's with you. That's not automatic. That's calculated. Any other questions? Should we be dating differently? Are our filters broken? That's a great question. So this came up. I've been talking with a lot of people about that over this past weekend, actually. And one thing I would say is that when we think about dating and relationships, we frame a lot of this in desire, in being chosen, in being cherished, right? Which are all lovely things, but they're dangerous things because nobody's better at desire than narcissists. They're the best. They've got desire wired. And we think that love and dating and intimacy are somebody wanting you, right? But there's wanting you and then there's being with you, right? Wanting you may not translate into conversations where you feel seen and heard. Wanting you may not translate into a person being willing to, again, listen to your vulnerabilities and needs in a safe way. Wanting you may not even translate into very basic stuff of a relationship, like showing up on time or emptying the dishwasher. But we put so much weight into the desire, which is, again, a very love mommy grandiose thing. We miss all the other stuff. So right off the bat, I think this is where Instagram, social media, all the rest of it has made some of this worse because we are very much in an era of desire, right? Like that sweeping kind of an epic love story, which now we can share with the world. I think that's always been a thing, but there's really no way to share that now. And there's nothing a narcissistic person likes better than that kind of display, especially if it's a grandiose narcissistic person. That's one thing, right? Is to be aware of that kind of dynamic. And then to really think about this as connection and more than anything, attunement. Actually, not even connection is not the right word, as much as attunement. And not everyone's going to attune the same way. I think something that we don't always pay attention to is how does attunement work for us? And we talk about attachment, but that's almost too deep. Like attunement to me is how does somebody attend to you? Listen, there are people out there who are on their phones a lot, and so if somebody's on their phone and responds, that's fine for them. They're not bothered by that. That may bother the hell out of you. I know I'm going to be personal. A quirk of mine is when someone shouts to me from another room, "Hey, Rom, can you bring me?" I hate that. And I know it goes back to my childhood. It absolutely goes back to my childhood. I was always being screamed at and called out of my room. I was a reader. I was that kid kind of in my own world. So I hated being called. And it was always sort of I was yelled at, to called out of my room to be yelled at. Right. Which was, I'm like, it was great. So I'm getting two for the price of one. If somebody wants to talk to me, it's a fussy thing of mine. I would prefer they either text me and say, "Hey, Rom, can you come over here?" Or they actually come, or even ring me and say, "Hey, Rom, do you have a minute?" Or come to my door and say, "Could you come talk to me?" I don't like being called. It feels like something you do with an animal, and I'm not a fan. But other people say, "I don't even think twice about it." Like I grew up in a big, noisy family, and that's how we communicated. Neither of us is wrong. It's what's right for us. And that attunement searching means that if you focus on that, for most narcissistic people, you're not going to attune to them because they're not going to, you're not going to get any of those needs met. But I don't know that our filters are broken. I think what happens is it's this big overcorrection, right? Initially, we're very much driven by societal scripts and family scripts and what some of us want to be rescuers, and we're absolute bait for the vulnerable narcissist. Some people want to be desired. There's where the grandiose narcissist will come in. Some people view like over control and being overwhelmed, like somebody who wants to spend every waking minute with you, especially if there was sort of a lot of abandonment and attachment fails in childhood. A malignant narcissist could really move in there, right? So our vulnerabilities are very much can be like in terms of getting stuck in these relationships can come from an earlier place. But if someone's approaching us and they're charming, charismatic, interesting, smart, all the things that we're attracted to, we're going to get pulled. Again, nobody's behaving typically like this on a first date, and if they are, whew. But so my point is, I think our filters are a little bit broken, but I think it's all of us have broken filters. And I think people who have been through narcissistic family systems and past relationships, we definitely struggle with trust. We may under trust, we may over trust, we may not trust our own sense. We might say, "I'm being too judgmental," to which I tell a lot of people, be too judgmental. You may end up throwing away potentially a perfectly fine person to have kept around, but it beats the alternative, especially when you're in the healing phase of all of this. But I would say we need to slow down in terms of dating. I think that this sort of volume dating doesn't always work as much. I think it's also, though, and I do tell people this, you have to understand your backstory. I think the problem with a lot of dating advice is it's given one size fits all. But your story up to the point of that first date is different than everyone else's in the world. And so all of that brought you to that moment. And so you're going to date very differently than someone else. But getting away from the being chosen, being picked, being cherished, being desired part of it, focusing on the attunements and recognizing that how you attune is going to be different than others. And things that bother you may not bother other people, and things that bother you may. I think sometimes we tell ourselves, well, that shouldn't bother me. It bothers you, so it bothers you. It doesn't matter if it shouldn't bother you. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if it doesn't bother someone else. So if those might be different ways to approach this, but it's tough. It's tough in sort of a post-narcissism world. Any other questions? What are the best coping strategies once you go no contact? That's a great question. Going no contact, as we know, is the most sort of the most advanced, most extreme, if you will, of all contact strategies. It's not one available to everyone, and it's just what it sounds like. No back and forth contact. There is no answering a call, there's no taking the email. In many cases, the person has used all electronic forms to block this person. There's no seeing them. Okay. And so it's a some people will say going no contact was so important to them, but it wasn't easy. So the classic way that this happens is usually in intimate relationships where there weren't a lot of deep ties. Like you may not, somebody moved out, so there's no longer that kind of physical space. You may not have had intermingled finances. It's not a divorce. And above all else, you don't have minor children. Okay. So then you've gone no contact, right? The hardest things people will say is that they still feel like, as much as you've gone no contact, which is working for you, there's that pull to want to look at the social media. There is there is still some of the rumination. There is the questioning of oneself, all the stuff we would expect when somebody makes this big a shift around a relationship where there was a lot of confusion and a lot of harm. And so some of the best ways to cope are have people you can go and sound it out around who will say, of course, this was hard, and have ground rules with the people who know you. Sometimes people think they're being helpful when they say, hey, I just want you to know, they're like, I saw their social media and they look terrible and they've gained all kinds of weight. You need to, ground rules are, you tell people, I want to know nothing. And then if your people around you respect you and care about you, they will honor that. Because I understand what a friend might say, like, I want you to feel better. Like they look a mess. No contact is you just don't know. You're really trying to sort of clear your mind. So set those ground rules with people you know, and then the ones who can honor that, talk it out. If there is therapy, if you're in therapy or coaching of any kind, that can be also a place to talk it out. But don't let someone say, don't talk about this because you're just living in the past. Sometimes knowing you have a place to off gas and have a context to know this is normal. This is something that once harmed you. So it remains the boogeyman in the closet, right? And so that's what little kids want to talk about. Ma, is there something in the closet? No, honey, there's not. We don't tell our kids, shut up. I answered that last night. Don't ever ask me again. The things that go bump in the night scare us. And this is narcissistic. Our ex former narcissist is a thing that goes bump in the night. So being kind, hopefully you have people around you who can talk it out and say, I get it. And that's what I tell the clients. I get it. I get why this is still top of mind for you. Other coping strategies, keep busy, but not in a dissociated way, right? So do the things, and this is where all those lists I talk about come into play. Remember, not the ick list, but the biscuits in bed. Like, what are the things you gave up for this relationship? Now start trying them, because just shift in activity. So once you find yourself going down a rumination loop, shift. That can mean going physically outside. It could be making a phone call. It could mean shifting activities, wash the dishes, do something that's a bit more tactile, let the water run over your hands or something, but shift things up. Breaking out of the rumination piece can make a big, big difference. Trying new things that you didn't do with that person or those people is also really helpful. Like going to the restaurant you did not go to with them, or trying the thing maybe they even told you not to try because they think it's dumb. Doing some of those things allows new memory to sort of kind of override. But a big one I want to share with you, okay, is showing yourself grace. It's what I call the dark night of the soul, doom scrolling. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm so ashamed that I created a Finsta so I could go look at them, right? It happens and people do it. And instead of viewing it as, oh my gosh, I had 25 days of no contact and I blew it. This isn't sobriety. Okay. So if you do, understand that this is a person who really got into your head, and that it is normal to have that moment where you might want to go back in there. And sometimes it might make you feel worse. Don't compound that by then saying, I'm so dumb for looking at it. You looked at it. It was normal. It was human. In some cases, you might even feel better. In fact, if they do look like crap. But in some cases, it may set you back. But don't make it as like, this is my fault. See, I'm so weak. I went back in there. Nah, you didn't hoover yourself. You just, that natural draw to almost engage with something that scared you. That's another big one. So therapy, other people, engaging in activities you couldn't engage in while you were in the relationship. When you feel comfortable, some people find journaling overwhelming and some people don't. It really depends on the person. Writing some of it out so you can see sort of the shifts and the progress you're making. And then obviously having the structures in place, letting people know what your no contact rules are. Like, I don't want to hear, and don't surprise me with a piece of information or a tidbit I don't want to know. So definitely letting people around you know. And then any kinds of body calming strategies you can also have. Breathing, body scanning, like paying attention how your body feels from top to bottom. Dr. Kate Truitt talks about havening, which is really this sense of like, it's like almost like in some cases it's rubbing yourself if that feels comfortable, holding yourself, but really physically sort of soothing yourself while also saying soothing things. So there's an association between the soothing words and your own soothing touch. But and again, keeping busy, but not as a way to distract or dissociate, but as a way also to sort of build a sense of I'm continuing to live. And here's and one last one I want to leave you with is building a sense of what we call efficacy. And what's efficacy? Doing something once and being able to do it. So that might be anything from putting together a piece of IKEA furniture to making a souffle to getting tomatoes to yield tomatoes over the summer. Like you do something, because once we do something, like I could do that again. And as we build efficacy, it's not just like, oh, now I can grow tomatoes. It's I can do something. And the more things we think we can do, the more sort of affirmed our sense of self also becomes, like this sense of I can take something on, I can solve a novel problem. And that's often taken away from us in these relationships. So I hope a combination of all that helps. But if you slip, and there's a day you slip, or you do respond to the text, or you do reach out, or you do look at social media at 3 a.m, be kind to yourself, because that's super, super normal, and recognize you can get back on that horse and keep coping in that way. So I hope that helps. We take take one more question here. We're coming to the end of the hour. Do narcissistic people target younger people? Are younger people easier to manipulate? My ex has, I like that using an ex. My ex has only ever been with younger people, but most recently his new supply is shockingly younger. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say about the younger piece. I'm assuming this person means like for dating, right? They often do. The short answer is yes. Why? Not because younger people are more foolish. I think that would be unfair to younger people, but there's a power difference, right? Now, in some cases, that power difference can be money. It can be literal social status in the world. It could be life experience, right? I mean, all of us know more things when we're a little 10 years older, right? But all of those things, though, that older person, just the accumulation of knowledge, puts them in a more empowered, emboldened position relative to the much younger person. And in fact, it's even almost a built-in, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a built-in, not contempt, but like, wait till you've been around the block a minute, then I'll be able to show you. So there's like this knowledge base that allows a person to just, again, have this position of power from the jump. So that's one piece of it. I think those are the most crucial dynamics, sort of power-oriented stuff. But then there's a whole nother piece, which is the status oriented piece, right? And we still have very much a May, December narrative out there of, especially when it's a man with a woman. Here I am, and my partner, wife, whatever, is 20 years younger than me, 15 years younger than me. And there is that sense of like, oh, whoa, like what do you got going on, that you could attract someone who's more attractive, right? A younger person is traditionally thought of as more attractive. So you could bring someone in who is more attractive through their youth. That is meant to be a testament to that older person who is able to draw that younger person in, right? But you're all that. And so again, it is, I think that those kinds of dynamics, it's not to say that's always the case, that there are people who have age differences in their relationship, and that's not why they were pursued. But when we're talking about narcissistic folks, it's definitely why they're pursued. So they get to go around town with a partner who's 20 years younger than them. And it's typically gendered. It's typically a man choosing a younger woman. And everyone's like, whoa, he's a stud. And they're looking at their partner who's their close age and is certainly not walking around with all the parts not having been gravity damaged like the rest of us. So it's that youth definitely becomes, it's a power thing. That's really, the answer is yes, it's power. But that shockingly younger piece, though, I don't know if your narcissistic ex has money or some power through some other means, but it's definitely becomes a magnifier. And again, it gets them a lot of narcissistic supply, because people are it feels like people are envious of them, or jealous of them, or think they're a player, who think they're, makes some assumption about their sex appeal or something like that. So it gets them a lot of supply. And I think so they get a lot of stuff out of that sort of younger partner kind of a thing. And then as they get older, it's someone who actually can help them, might even be able to take care of them, because we'll be in better physical shape to play nurse, I guess, if they're, depending on how old this X is. But it's not an uncommon dynamic. Again, that's not to uniformly pathologize the dynamic, but it's a dynamic that frequently shows up in narcissistic relationships, especially as they move on. And, again, so it's no fool like an old fool, right? Is how they say it. And they get into these circumstances and they look, I mean, it look a little maybe odd to the world, but it's when it's the narcissistic dynamic, that's usually what's happening. And it can be hard if you have kids with this person and now your kids are meeting this sort of, I don't know, developmentally kind of off person and being told that this is sort of my partner. It definitely can create some odd narratives in a family, especially for a child who might have already have an adult child or even a child who's experienced the harms of that narcissistic parent. And now someone's being trotted in who, like I said, developmentally is probably not always in the right place to be in that role. And they've watched their own parent go through something. So it gets messy. So thank you for that question. And thank you for all of you just sort of fighting the fight. And again, all of these issues you're bringing up, no contact, co-parenting, dating, these are the issues. But I think it's also understanding that in a way we do need a new paradigm of how we relate, especially early in a relationship. And so much of what we're sold by society around, like I said, desire and infatuation and all of that, it's a dangerous narrative. What we need to be looking for is sometimes the stuff we often really didn't believe we deserve, like respect, compassion, balance, things like that in a relationship. And above all else, we should also be looking for a well-regulated partner, a partner who can manage frustration and anger. And if just because they don't get the parking spot they want, that they don't blow a gasket and that we don't make excuses for that too. So I want to thank everyone. We'll keep these coming up and keep you posted. But please, please, if you're interested in that therapist program, I don't know that I'm going to do this again for a very, very long time. So I mean, I'm being honest. It's a lot of work to organize. So it'll be a long time before I do this therapist program again. So if you're on the fence, it's going to be a long-term fence here because it's just a lot of work to organize these. So if you want to come and have that intensive, this would be a great opportunity to get that. And in terms of the retreat, we've never done one live for this long period of time for a few days together that really encompasses multiple elements of not only learning breathing and other techniques to help you soothe, but also the connection piece and some really interesting exercises and getting your questions answered in real time, benefiting from other people's answers, and then actually finding out how much you help other people with what you know, the other things we're going to learn at that retreat. Like I said, London for the therapist, North Carolina for the folks who are interested, who anyone who is engaging, who's going through the experience of healing from a narcissistic relationship. And there's emails email addresses you can send questions to, but all the details are in the YouTube video description and Instagram bio. Thank you so much. And we'll see you very soon. Hope you're well. And it's lovely. Thank you for listening to my tantrum today. Bye now.